Welcome back to the Free Titan. Today I'm going to conclude this 7-part series on the planets and their mythological counterparts. And I'm going to finish up by talking about the only planet I haven't done an episode on yet, which is the Sun, and his mythological incarnation as the Greek god Apollo. Now, in Greek mythology, Apollo and Artemis are twins, and they respectively represent the sun and the moon. So last week I did a talk about Artemis and the moon, and everything the moon signifies. So the moon is our emotional body, our subconscious mind, our personality. And mythologically, the moon also, at least as Artemis, represents Mother Nature and sort of the ferocity of Mother Nature, which in a way is guiding us all to grow and evolve as well, as much as our own human mothers are. So the sun, while the moon and the mother is very near to us as an individual, as a person, the sun is distant. The sun stands apart. The sun is a more masculine archetype, whereas the moon is the sort of feminine mother archetype. And the sun in Greek mythology signifies a great deal of things, a lot of talents. So like Apollo is the master lyre player. He's a master musician, a master poet. One of the places that's very connected to Apollo in Greece, especially ancient Greece, is Delphi, which was a center of prophecy and sort of oracular practices. So a lot of oracles lived there, and individuals and states alike would consult the oracle at Delphi for guidance and wisdom on important decisions in their personal life or in the context of a state, in their political life. And he also is the archer, so there's a sort of militaristic element to Apollo. So it's like there's a lot of very sort of diverse qualities and talents that are ascribed to the god Apollo. And it's hard to make sense of what it all means, because if you think about like Saturn or Kronos, right? It's the god of sort of chaos and I would say ancient law, right? Like karmic law. Saturn is a planet of karmic balance and sort of, getting back what you put out into the world, or having other people treat you the way you treat others. This is Saturnian law, which is different from political law, which is Jupiter, right? So Jupiter is political organization, it's constitutions, it's the rule of law, but they're human laws, not sort of divine or karmic laws. Mars has to do a lot with sort of masculine power and strength, virility, and warfare. Venus has to do with love, Mercury communication, the moon is the personality and motherhood, the subconscious mind, the emotions, and then the sun is like all of these things in one. So it's really hard to pinpoint, or sort of give an example of what is the solar archetype, except to say that in a way, the sun combines aspects of many of the other planets, actually. Like Mercury and Venus can be quite adept at playing music. Mars is good at war. Venus is good at love, etc. And in the sun, we find aspects of a number of these planets. And if you think about it in terms of, I've talked in a lot of these videos about the spiritual significance of these planets and their energy centers in the body. Well, the sun is the third eye in spiritual astrology. It's connected to the pineal gland, which is why it's so connected to prophecy and the oracles at Delphi, because they were using this intuition, this intuitive perception, to perceive truth directly, not intellectually, not necessarily scientifically, but it was just a direct perception of truth. It was a more mystical perception of what was real and what was true. Now, when we look at some of these other manifestations of Apollo and the sun, like poetry and music, these are also more direct perceptions of truth. They bypass the intellect. I think, to some extent, you need an intellect to write music or poetry, but the feeling we have is more aesthetic. And so like the branch of philosophy that deals with aesthetics, especially if you read the writings of Schopenhauer in The World is Will and Representation, he lays out this theory of aesthetics where it's more it's a sensation, it's a feeling, it's an experience of truth when you look at art or when you hear music. And his argument and my argument now in terms of Apollo and the sun perceiving truth is that, when you look at philosophy, it can in a way take you away from truth because it's so intellectual. Now, philosophy can lead you to a sort of super conscious perception of truth or of the divinity, the sort of cosmic consciousness, but only if it's used as a step on the way. Whereas like music and poetry, or even dancing or art, can give you a direct experience of joy or of love or of peace. You can look at some of Monet's artwork and it gives you this aesthetic sensation of what, the sunlight bouncing off a stack of hay might feel like, or the sunlight reflecting off of a pond or a bridge. It's not an intellectual expression, right? Like, because some artwork, some painting is expressing a story or like a fable, a story that we're familiar with intellectually, and so we look at it and it triggers this intellectual rationalization or analysis. And the sun's direct perception of the truth could be more directly conveyed, and this is getting in sort of in line with some of what Schopenhauer was talking about, or the aesthetic philosophers were talking about, is it's more triggering this inner understanding and recognition of truth directly, not with a backstory, not with a fable, not with a myth behind it, not with a history. It's not an expression of a person or a biography. It's simply an expression of a feeling of what it is to be human, what it is to love, what it is to be have joy or be in love. And so obviously music triggers this sort of direct experience of a consciousness, of a certain type of consciousness, and art can do this as well. And so if you look at what Apollo is good at, or what he's known for, a lot of it is connected to this direct expression of truth, this aesthetic perception of truth through like poetry or music. And I would add art into this. Venus is connected to a lot of these things as well, but if we're thinking of it in terms of a sort of prophetic or sort of superconscious perception of the divine, or a sort of metaphysical reality or truth, we're talking about the sun. And mystics for thousands of years have all sort of not intellectually agreed, but if we read what they're saying, there's a real alignment with this conclusion that truth or God or bliss or joy is experiential. Mystics have all talked about the experience of the divine. And I think this is what we're really talking about with the sun, is like, how are we experiencing the divine? The moon is a reflection of the divine, just as our personhood is a reflection of the divine. This idea that we are sons and daughters of the divine or of God is an expression of this, that in our individuality we can reflect the light of God or of the cosmic divinity, the creator. But to experience this cosmic truth directly requires us to leave behind our individual selves and go beyond this idea of me as Victor, or her as Susie, or him as Bob. This is like the sense of us as individuals, as separate entities, as little pieces of consciousness, separate from the origin of all of humanity, of all of creation, of all of nature. And the sun, this intuitive direct perception through the third eye, through this overcoming of this idea or belief in our separation from God or from the Creator. When we overcome this idea of separateness, even just for a minute, when we're writing poetry, if it's very inspired, or we're writing music, or we're singing songs, or we're playing music, we can forget ourselves so much that we don't remember who we are. And if you've ever experienced this, it's a really blessed experience. This can be done in meditation, but it can also be done in athletics. It can be done in playing music. It can be certainly accomplished through dance. And I think Apollo is behind all of these experiences in a way. And you can see how other planets can help us get there, right? Like, to be skilled in music, we probably have some facility with another planet, like Mercury or Venus or Mars. Similarly with dance or with athletics or poetry, right? Poetry has to do with language, so there's a lot of Mercury in it, and grace, which is Venus. And yet the closer we get to this direct perception of the light, which can be expressed in myriad ways, we inevitably come to this experience of ourselves as more than ourselves. This experience of ourselves is forgetting sort of who we are for a minute, even if just for a minute as an individual person. This can be experienced through love as well, and through human love. Now, many mystics and Christian saints, they're not talking about experiencing God in these ways. Unfortunately, I think they're talking about experiencing God through this difficult path of self-renunciation and asceticism. And this is certainly one way to experience this oneness with divinity. But there are, I think, other more temporary ways to experience this union with God. And I think even just a very mundane example, and I don't mean to say this as like a very high way of experiencing oneness, but if you look at really high level athletes, I think Eckhart Tolle, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think Eckhart Tolle said one of the reasons we're so fascinated with watching sports on TV or even in person is not because it's so interesting, but it triggers this incredible experience subconsciously in us to watch someone being so in the moment that they forget that they're an individual, they're separate from source. Now, as soon as the game's over, as soon as the big moment's over, they're going back to their ideas about who they are and all of that. But I think similarly we could express this idea to musicians. If you go see a really masterful pianist play like a piano concerto live, like they're gone. They could play a 20-minute piece and it's like they are so engrossed, so concentrated on the beauty of music. And I think this is probably a better example because their consciousness is more refined in this moment. Like if someone's playing a Beethoven piano concerto for 20 minutes and they're completely engrossed in the music. And if you watch a master pianist play, like they don't even read sheet music, they just know it. They become the piece. Their consciousness becomes so at one with the music that Beethoven probably channeled from a divine source, because I don't think Beethoven as an ego is capable of that kind of genius. I think genius happens when we go beyond our small sense of self with a lowercase s, and we become attuned to our larger self, which is our connection to source, our connection to the divinity, to God. And so when you watch a pianist, and this is a better example, I think, play a beautiful piece of genius work, they're gone. They cease to exist as anything other than a conduit for this idea, this genius idea that was channeled first by Beethoven and then consequently by every pianist that plays this piece. They just become a sort of a channel, like a hollow channel for this genius to flow through them. And this is a really beautiful experience of this going beyond oneself as an individual self and as part of a sort of cosmic whole. And in this particular case, I think these pianists or a violin player or a cellist or whatever it is, they become for this moment lost in the music. And if you think of them practicing like a really, a masterful pianist, I've heard they practice for up to like 8 hours a day. So that means for many, many, many hours a day, they are lost in this concentration of beautiful music and genius. Now, this is getting very close to a sort of mystical idea of being a yogi, where you're lost in this contemplation of God for many hours at a time in meditation. So if maybe there's only a hair's breadth difference between a master pianist practicing beautiful music 8 hours a day and a yogi sitting in meditation 8 hours a day. I don't know. But it's worth considering. It's worth thinking about. I think maybe everyone should take a minute to consider what it means to be one with God, because I think there are many ways. Similarly, you could talk about a dancer practicing beautiful dance routines for many hours a day and being lost in this concentration and the aesthetic beauty of this body movement. I think martial arts also originally was meant to take us there. And in Hinduism, there's this idea that all of these practices, music, martial arts, poetry, it's all meant to take us to this higher state of consciousness. And circling back to our discussion of Apollo, I think we see a Western expression of this idea expressed mythologically through the talents of Apollo, which he's known for. And I'll read a little paragraph from this book on mythology, which I've been referencing quite a bit. So again, the sun is a golden color. Apollo is associated with the sun. So here we go. Rich in gold is Apollo, with golden lyre, which is a stringed musical instrument from ancient Greece, and golden bow, golden locks, and a golden tunic, but he is vast. So this idea of his vastness is getting to this idea of the Son as a connection, a portal between the individual and the cosmos, between the individual and the Godhead. But he is vast, a God who is great enough to contain multitudes. There we go again. He is the far shooter, for he must stand apart to do his work. And I think this is very interesting because this gets back to this feminine masculine dichotomy where Mother Nature is near, right? Mother Nature is near. Mother Nature is in all the trees and the rivers and the forests and the earth in which we grow the plants, which are also Mother Nature. And the mother nurtures us from her own breast when we're children. Mother is so near to us, so one with us. And we even come out of the wombs of our own mothers. So this oneness with the divine feminine is so profound. It's even expressed metaphorically, I think, through the process of gestation in the womb and being literally brought out of the body of our mother. This expresses the nearness of Mother Nature, or in my opinion, the Holy Spirit in Christian terms is Mother Nature, or at the very least connected very deeply to it, but it's a feminine idea. And then on the other hand, we have this idea of the masculine archetype, the father, which is the son. And, in Greek mythology, Jupiter is also considered the father, but in many other religions, the son is more of the sort of all-father figure. Like in Egyptian mythology and religion, the sun god Ra is the dominant figure in their religion, and he is very clearly depicted as being the sun god. So here we go. The vast Apollo, he is the far shooter, and he is known very often as the far shooter. I think even Homer references Apollo as the far shooter. For he must stand apart to do his work. And as well as the lyre, he lays claim to the bow. So he stands apart to do his work, just as this masculine archetype stands apart to do his work. And in Christianity, God the Father is a more distant figure. The Father is a more distant figure, I think, for us archetypally and psychologically, and certainly religiously, it's been described as that way. And so the Father is far away where the Mother is near, and as a Christian society, like the whole Western world is Christian, we, this is imbued into our almost cellular understanding of what God is this very distant, more judgmental figure. This is the biblical God. And I think my understanding of God is that he is much more merciful and forgiving. And I think the God Jesus spoke of is merciful and forgiving and incredibly loving, infinitely loving. But this is also getting in tune more with God as a sort of feminine being, God as a mother, more than a father, because not all mothers, but mothers, if we think of the archetypal mother, she is softer than the father. She's more forgiving. When we want something, we go begging to our mother, at least typically, right? And so I think in the West, we lack this sort of attunement to God as the mother. But anyway, we'll go back to Apollo, which is God as the father. God is the sort of biblical father who is distant and more detached from our personal experience here on earth. Sweet music is his. So we talk about Apollo as the god of music, and music as this connecting influence between human beings as individuals and the sort of the source, the Godhead, which is where we lose our individuality in our absorption with the divine. But not only is sweet music Apollo, the paean is his, sung in triumph or as a war cry. So in ancient Greece, the paean, these armies would sing these war hymns going into war or even after in victory. And so this also belongs to Apollo. So it's talking about, we're getting into this idea of even warfare as a way of finding oneness with God, or at least absorption. And there's many stories of warriors, especially in more heroic literature like Homer, where they go into these experiences. Like in Homer, a lot of heroes, not just Achilles, but also like Diomedes, Agamemnon, Ajax. There's a number of heroes where there's this piece of the literature dedicated to their almost mystical superiority in battle. They seem untouchable, and they talk about how in these moments, many times these heroes are backed by the gods. In Book 5 of the Iliad, Diomedes wounds both Ares and Aphrodite, which is an incredible feat. especially wounding Ares, the very god of war. But in this moment, a close reading of the literature will show you that Athena was the one backing him. So in this experience, I think it's called his Aristeia. I'm not sure about that, but there's a Greek word for this part of the Homeric literature where it talks about the hero's sort of almost apotheosis into a godlike being for a short time. And I think this connection of Apollo with war speaks to that, where there is this even mystical portal between the experience of warfare and this almost godlike experience as being a super individual, right? Where you're transcending your individual fears, your individual concerns, or even conception of yourself as a separate being from the source. Like, you are channeling this divinity even in warfare, which is a fascinating idea. But Homer is a great, maybe the best expression of this divine experience in warfare. He is the God who both spreads the miasma of sickness and disperses it. So he is the God of healing. And I think healers like prophets or oracles are often channeling a healing energy to their patients. So that's a difference between just giving someone a medicine, prescribing a medicine for what ails someone, and actually channeling a healing energy to someone. And someone can channel that healing energy through them from a divine source without ever even using medicine as well. So this is Apollo's connection to medicine. He is gentle and violent. So we talk about him as the god of poetry and music, but also he's not the god of war, but he can be found in war. Fair of face and dark of brow, healer and destroyer. Praise the God in his greatness. May he grant us only good and avert all evil in our days. Whoever knows Apollo is raised to greatness. And so here we go. So if you have this well-established connection to the source through any one of these means, whether it's meditation, prayer, music, poetry, dance, art, you have this real connection to Apollo. You know Apollo. And I think what this means when it says, whoever knows Apollo is raised to greatness, what it means is exactly what Schopenhauer was talking about, which is whoever knows the idea, the source, like in Kantian terms, the thing in itself, the very idea, this direct perception of truth, whether it's through music or art, this direct perception of aesthetic truth, of truth in itself, truth with a capital T, an almost mystical perception of truth and the divine, and is especially able to express it, whether it's through oratory or art or politics or dance or meditation or through prophecy. These people are raised to greatness because we all feel aesthetically, we feel it in our bones, we feel it emotionally in our hearts, that they have this connection to source. And we might not intellectually be able to express why it makes us feel the way it does, but we all know in our bones. And I think this is our soul talking to us, individually and collectively. When we collectively recognize that kind of greatness, that is the connection to the sun, to Apollo. And I even think you look at a really supreme athlete like Michael Jordan, in a way he was a knower of Apollo, like his connection to athleticism. And Apollo is very much connected to athletics. When he played basketball, it was almost divine. The way his body moved, the grace with which he moved and shot the ball, the tenacity with which he played, like he wasn't human. When we watch him play basketball, he wasn't human. Similarly, when we watch a great pianist perform, like they're not human. When we read incredible poetry, when the poet in that moment channeled that poetry, he wasn't human or she was not human. Similarly, a dancer, they're transcendent when they're performing a piece of genius with absolute concentration and attunement to this routine. They're not human because they are not an individual. They have gone beyond this idea of themselves as an individual. They don't know that they are Susie or Bob. They simply know the routine. They know the music. They know the move. Now, the thing to remember with all of these examples is as soon as the music's done, as soon as the game is over, they go back to being tethered to their ego, tethered to themselves as Michael Jordan or as a pianist or as Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo Ma is another great example. You know, they go back to being Michael Jordan and Yo-Yo Ma. They go back to being a human being with human problems and human concerns and anxieties and depressions, because this connection they have is very tenuous. And now, for example, Michael Jordan, he doesn't play basketball anymore competitively. He doesn't get these connections to oneness. He probably misses it with all his heart. But it was destined to be something that lasted for him maybe 20 years at best. For someone like Yo-Yo Ma, he could play longer, right? So it's a longer experience, but it's still temporal. There's still bookends on this. When you look at someone like Jesus Christ, I really believe he was in a state of oneness constantly. He had a state of oneness and attunement to the source always. Maybe not when he was born, I don't know, but at some point in his life, maybe it was his conception, maybe when he was 18, maybe when it was when he was 20 or 30. You know, he was only active in the Bible. You know, the speeches and the miracles that we read of in the Bible, I believe only happened from 30 to 33 in his life. So maybe it was when he was conceived, maybe it was at some point in his life, but at least the Jesus we know of and revere and worship, I believe that being was absolutely one with God, always. Waking, sleeping, meditating, eating, talking, playing music, not playing music, it doesn't matter. He had that source inside of him in every cell of his being always. And that's what makes him greater as a spiritual being than someone like Michael Jordan or Yo-Yo Ma or Babe Ruth or whoever. Because there was no end to his experience of oneness, his experience of this solar connection to God, you know, by going beyond this identification with the subconscious mind and our personality and our ego and our flaws and our traumas. A figure like Jesus Christ went beyond that forever. Even in the moment he was dying, even when he was being tortured and crucified, he was in that moment. He was in that moment always. And so to me, this is what Apollo is. This is what the sun is. This is what real heroism is. This is what real beauty is. And this is what genius is. Any expression of genius, therefore, has this connection to the sun. And to, in a Greek sense, the god Apollo. Because it's through this channel, through this portal, in our third eye, which is the sun, where we perceive truth directly. And when I read Schopenhauer for the first time, and I really started to try to understand him, however much I understand him, I felt the genius of what he was saying, which is exactly what I've been talking about. It's like, and he talks about art more than other things, and music, but it's because in these expressions, we go beyond the intellect, and not just the intellect. We go beyond the ego. We go beyond the ego being our sense of ourself. In this absorption of contemplation of aesthetic beauty, we become one with the source. And in that moment, we feel bliss. Now, when you read like John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism is the greatest good for the greatest number, right? But John Stuart Mill said, one measure of higher pleasure trumps a great deal of lesser pleasure. So the pleasure we get from direct perception of God in meditation, or let's say, in a lesser sense, the beauty of listening to box cello, played by Yo-Yo Ma. This pleasure is greater than the pleasure we get from, eating a hot dog at a baseball game. It's more because it's closer to the source itself. Everything else is this dim reflection of God's beauty and truth in itself. But the closer we get, and Plato talked about this like ladder of pleasure in the Symposium. And when we get higher up the ladder, we get closer and closer to the perception of truth, which is God. And this gives us also a little bit of flexibility in how we want to perceive God, how we want to understand God. Because in like Christianity, for example, at least as an institution, they've given us this idea of God, which is quite hard to perceive. God the Father, God the Absolute, is so distant. He's so impersonal. He's so almost impossible to comprehend, except to the greatest mystics. But God as aesthetic beauty, God as poetry, God as music, God as even athletic grace. Now this brings it closer to us. And I think this is where, Greek mythology or astrology or Schopenhauer can help us understand the divine. God as experiencing beauty in nature. God is listening to the wind blow through the leaves. It takes us somewhere. It resonates with our soul, with our innermost heart, with our remembrance of what it is to be one with the divine. And so this is why Apollo is so connected to all of these myriad expressions in the human experience. Because in all of these expressions, all of these experiences he's connected to, we find not a reflection, in a way a reflection, but more a connection to the Godhead, a connection to source, a connection to beauty and truth. And we can find that in music. Apollo plays the lyre. We can find it in poetry. We can find it in prophecy, which is a lot of what the Bible is about. But there are so many ways to experience this truth. And again, that's the beauty to me of Greek mythology, is that it brings it closer to us as human beings. It doesn't seem so distant. This is not to undermine the truth of Christianity or the truth of the highest mystics. It's just to say, for the vast majority of human beings, these kind of truths are incomprehensible. The truths from the book of Revelation, of John the Baptist, of Jesus Christ, of all these great prophets. It's hard for us to wrap our head around as human beings, and maybe impossible. But the truth of God expressed as beautiful music or beautiful poetry, we've all felt that. We've all felt inspired by music at some point in our life. And I think, there's different levels of vibration and frequency to this, but the basic idea that these expressions, that music can be a bridge between us, let's just take music, can be a bridge between us and the divine. This in a way is to understand what Apollo is. And Mother Nature is also a bridge between us and the divine, and it's divinity herself. But to kind of parse them apart and say, that there's different ways, there's different paths to this truth, and that we can all be attracted to the path that suits our temperament. Because for some people, they find God walking in nature. That's their cathedral. And that's beautiful. And if that gets you there, that's all you need. But for other people, to realize that playing the violin and being lost in the absorption of the music of Mozart, and actually playing Mozart and being absorbed in it, this is no less. This is no less than worshiping in a church. This is no less than walking through the woods. Whatever gets us there, to that highest resonance inside of ourselves, that highest possible reflection of God's beauty and truth inside of ourselves, this is our God. This is how we connect to the divine. And so one of the things I love about mythology and astrology also, but especially if astrology understood mythologically, is that it does show us that there are different paths to the divine through human experiences. And this can be true no matter what religion you belong to.